Thanks for coming out on a nice G&A and everybody joining us online. Looks like we have quite a few people there. There's a lot going on with milk markets and dairy policy, as there seems to always be, and New York's kind of right in the middle of it. So we have some exciting things to talk about here today, and I'm looking forward to it. Turn it over to Commissioner Hall.
Oh, well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Feel like it's been a little while, but good to be back with all of you. I would say that as usual, there's no shortage of things for us to think about or worry about or pay attention to, but and just being on the phone web meeting yesterday with Washington, I think that view continues to be a little bit foggy, sometimes chaotic, but it makes coming up to New York feel very comfortable and good, where we have some good things happening in dairy. We have some predictable things happening in our state. We have an excellent budget for agriculture. We've got some policies and programs we've been aware of and around for a while that we're going to continue to do regardless. So I'm not going to say any more. I think you've got a great agenda. Kind of looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. A lot of good topics here. So thanks very much for being a part of this.
Okay, great, thanks. So we'll just move on to the economic outlook and question and answer. And then is this the order that we're going to do?
We collab. You'll
Okay.
hear from all of
Okay.
us. Yeah.
Well, take it away.
I think I have some opening things. Yeah.
And Liz is queuing up the PowerPoint, so just, I can see it. We don't have a clicker today, so Christine, Jody, and Catherine, I know you're on virtually. If you can just give us an indication of when Liz can click to the next slide, we'll follow your cues.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody. We all sort of provided some different topics here, so we'll switch back and forth and say what we need to. But just a quick introduction for myself. I know I had the opportunity to be here last time, but my name is Christine Broder. I'm with the DFA Risk Management Team out of the Syracuse, New York office. And I have the opportunity to work with producers and our DFA internal clients and customers, specifically on risk management all across the country. So I wanted to bring you some comments on what's happening on the supply side of the market. And I wanted to start here with Northeast. I know these charts are kind of tough to see on the screen here, but in general, Northeast production has been stronger here recently. You can see I've got New York there as the larger chart on the left. And overall, the milk production report we actually just got yesterday had New York production up 1.8% year over year. And that's continuing just a stronger trend there. Those red bars would be 2024, blue would be 2025, and then you can see the line would be 2026. So continuing a strong trend here in New York, but I would say somewhat moderate compared to some other country or other states in the country. And we'll look at that a little bit. Pennsylvania and Vermont, more or less flat production overall. Pennsylvania may be down a bit. And so you can see that again represented on the charts here. On the next slide, I would say overall milk production has been stronger, maybe not than expected recently, but certainly if we sat here a year ago, I don't think we would have thought that milk production would continue to climb at the rate it is. We had another 2+%, I think 2.5 actually was the May report we just got yesterday. It's being driven by a number of things, right? Obviously milk production comes from how many cows you have and then how much they're making. And both of those have been stronger. And the expectation is that that should hold for some of the year. If we just kind of go into the next chart, I think I was just listening to these gentlemen have an interesting conversation about cow numbers and heifer shortages and things like that. We do think that this cow number has been the biggest maybe surprise on the production side of the market. And if you just look at that chart on the left there, that represents the overall US dairy herd. We're now up to like 9.6 million head. And you just see the significant strength that's just kind of constant growth since the kind of tail or middle of 2024 there. A lot of that has come from planned expansions in other states, right? Other regions, particularly with Kansas, South Dakota, places like that. They knew that there was processing capacity coming in those areas, have been making adjustments on their dairies to sort of be able to sustain that. And so you do have this interesting balance of like heifers are still not super available, but it's not that they don't exist. They are well there. They are part of planned expansions, and that's really what's causing, one piece of what's causing the herd to continue to increase. I think the second piece here, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is that the beef market dynamics are encouraging dairy producers to keep cows a little bit longer, right? When you can get $1,800 for your beef on dairy calves, and it just makes it worthwhile to go through another lactation there. So you've got a much older herd that also is contributing to some of that. So if we move just to your focus, actually, sorry, I was going to do the chart. The slider chart here. I think it is interesting to reflect that culling's been relatively lighter. One thing that we maybe expected to see as we got into the beginning of 2026 is that culling would have picked up a little bit because milk prices did tighten up pretty considerably there, Q4 and Q2, Q1. And this chart's, again, a little bit tricky to see here, but the light blue represents 2026 compared to a couple other years there. And you can just see that 2026 was maybe a little bit higher than that green of 2025, so a little bit more than last year. But as time's gone on, that culling has really shrunk back down. So just not significant motion in that way that would lead us to think that this herd is going to change course anytime soon. Okay, Liz, you can go to the next chart there. I think it is worth talking about component production within this overall supply picture. So yes, you've definitely got more just straight up fluid milk, but you're also seeing producers do a better job of just creating more components there. And this is having repercussions in a lot of the processing space across the country. Again, part of the conversation I was just listening to, but I think most of this is genetically driven. And so there may be some changes that producers make as things get tight to sort of change up feed a little bit, but it's not expected to have a major impact. Again, that blue bar represents where we're at in 2026. You can just see just continued growth year over year on solids overall. And really, I don't see anything that causes this to change significantly as we move forward. Here is a little bit of a wild card, something that we are watching for milk production, and I think just overall dairy sentiment into the rest of the year would be drought conditions, particularly as we look out west, right? A lot of the expansion, those kind of where those that herd has really grown has been in those regions, and we are starting to be concerned about some of this dryness, what impact it has, certainly to feed availability, feed quality, and then even on dairy cow comfort in general too. So just some things that we're watching. I think we're not in a concern yet. When I talk to our producers out there in the Western region, they're watching it carefully, but they're not concerned quite yet. So we'll see what happens here over the rest of the spring. I think overall, though, if you go to the next slide, the margin outlook continues to be pretty favorable for dairy producers. And we'll get to kind of an overall like Northeast projection a little bit later. But when we look at feed, that feed costs have been lower. Obviously, the drought has the potential to change that around. But as everything sits right now, things feel relatively comfortable on farms from like a feed cost perspective and an overall margin perspective. And then if you go to the next slide, just to kind of finish up my my US perspective, I do think that this beef market continues to be an important thing to monitor as it relates to dairy. And it sounds kind of silly, right? Because this used to be just like a throwaway, but it's really important. Dairy producers in the Northeast are saying $3 to $5 a hundredweight of revenue they're generating from their cattle sales. And so that makes a really big difference if you're talking about like a $16 pound food price. That makes or break it quite a bit for our dairy producers. So something to certainly keep an eye on. That chart just gives you an idea of where the feeder cattle markets have gone, and they've been holding this like upper 90th percentile for quite a while. A little bit ups and downs, but just really strong. And fundamentally, I would say that market is supported to stay strong for a little bit here. I want to just finish up with a couple comments on global production, because I do think, we produce milk locally, but we are a global market that drives the commodity prices that build up into the milk check. And overall, milk production globally is really quite strong. This looks at some of the major exporting regions. So you got the EU, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and you can see that anytime that there's blue, that represents just year-over-year inclines. And so when this, increases. So when this was done, right, Europe was like 4.7% higher, Australia was 4.1, New Zealand was 6% higher, just much stronger milk flows coming out of other regions, in addition to how strong it's been here in the US. This all kind of comes together on the next slide here to give us just the strongest global growth that we've seen on the production side in over 10 years. It's a messy chart, I know, but each of those colors represents one of those regions, and you kind of get the overall milk production change year over year. So anything above the line would be growth in total net pounds of milk production. And so certainly a lot of strength, kind of started midway through 2025, continued through there. And I think that that is important, especially as we start thinking about moving into the demand side here. You know, exports continue to support U.S. dairy prices. We need that market, those markets. And I think that the more milk is out there that's competing for that, just the more difficult that story becomes. The last thing I brought is just a little bit on some of the regional differences. Again, these charts are a little tough on the screen, sorry, but in general, European milk production has started to come down a little bit from the much stronger that it was recently. And so we'll be watching that really closely, especially as it relates to exports going forward. I think we're flipping to Catherine to talk just a little bit about some of the other factors on farm.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to shift to talking about the demand side a little bit here, but I guess just one last slide I had thrown in last minute here, Christine, but sticking to the farm side is just, you know, keeping in mind when we look at farm margins, particularly when we focus in on the DMC margins, which tell a good story and a general trend of what's going on farm. Those are only looking at the feed component, which of course is the most important, but just to note that energy prices, of course, are another watch out or wild card, so to speak, that have the potential and are impacting both the consumer side of things as well as the farm side of things. So moving on to the next slide, or two slides, here we go. So when it comes to the demand side of the dairy markets today, you know, there's four things on the screen here I'll talk about, but really there's two major buckets. And the first three fall into the first bucket that I will call just general health and wellness trends overall. You know, when we think about things like the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act, which was a great success that we've all collectively been working on for well over a decade, this or the dietary guidelines, you know, those are really regulation keeping up with what a lot of folks already knew and trends that we were seeing in consumer preferences already. But nonetheless, those were two really good wins that I think are supporting the dairy market moving forward. GLP-1s I'll throw in that same general category of health and wellness, but these, you know, really have taken our world by storm and the industry by storm, and really serving as a catalyst to drive some trends that we're seeing in the food space, particularly in dairy. We'll talk in some of my comments about just the protein craze. If you're on a GLP-1 or if you're paying attention to some of these health and wellness trends, protein is incredibly important. Dairy is benefiting from that. We have a great story to tell, you know, really cost conscious protein products that we have. So this is really playing into things. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the second bucket I think is really important from the demand side is just the export demand. So here at home, domestically speaking, things are going just fine. We're sort of flat to a little bit above when it comes to domestic demand. But where we've seen the U.S. really shine has been on international demand. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. And Christine kind of teed it up for me. The U.S. dairy industry is well positioned to be a global powerhouse. She showed you in a previous slide those major major production areas of the world where we're seeing a lot of that milk come in. And for us, I think this is a really good story for us to tell. It really positions the U.S. for a successful future. But what it also does is, put us more, local farms being very much dependent upon global markets. And so what you'll hear in my comments as we talk about individual commodities is that in general, what we're seeing in the dairy space is that commodity prices are converging to the global market prices. And so to an extent, I think what we're seeing here today and we'll continue to see in the future is that milk checks are going to be more driven on those global factors and less what's going on in our local and national economies. All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to take us through our 4 major pricing commodities, and I'm starting with the class 4 side of things. Class 4 prices have been a lot more exciting to watch than the class 3 side of things. So I'll focus my comments here. First, starting with butter. Christine walked you through some of those milk production trends as well as the component trends that we are seeing. So we have no shortage of butter fat. Thanks to producers really making a huge focus in terms of genetics and otherwise to produce more fat and benefit their milk checks there. So we have plenty of butter fat that's making its way into butter production. You can see production is up 4.5% in the latest report from USDA. What I think is really interesting, I'm kind of just calling out one big thing in each of these commodities, is looking at again, talking about convergence of global prices and the importance of exports. With all of this excess production that we've had more production than what we can consume domestically. And so we've been able to balance the market with exports. And in order to do that, we need to have a really healthy price gap when it comes to butter. So the U.S. butter price has been far below that of our global competitors, and that's been able to keep that export product moving. Now, I will say, part of that export success is that it's kept inventories in check. You can see that inventories are down throughout this year, about 8.5% versus the prior year. I do wonder if this data is completely accurate. Sometimes, quite often, USDA has revisions to their data, and I do wonder if perhaps those inventory numbers are a bit lower than they should be. But nonetheless, I think our ability to export butter triple digits higher than we were doing last year is a success story, and it is keeping butter moving. From a price perspective, this is a typo here. Looking out at the futures market for the remainder of 2026, butter prices are anticipated to be in the $1.70 range. If you were to look out into 2027, that's where we see a little bit more support, and it goes up to $1.80. But nonetheless, plenty of butter and prices staying low to make sure we can continue to export butter. Moving on to the next slide. The non-fat market has been the most exciting market to watch, recently speaking. If you draw your attention to the right-hand side of the screen, it is difficult to see, but you're looking at a price of non-fat dry milk or skim milk powder. The US is the dark blue line, Europe is red, and New Zealand is the other gray line. And what you can see is that going back to 2022, this is a global market for us. So about 70% of US non-fat, last time I looked at those percentages, was going overseas. So when it comes to non-fat prices, the vast majority of the time, the US price is going to be right at equilibrium with what the global price is. There are times in history, 2025, Q4 2024, early 2025, where is an example when we had HPAI, significant impact in California drove non-fat production down. There are blips in the screen or time periods where the US price can get out of sync with the global equilibrium price, but it never lasts too long. So when it came to 2026, you can see the blue line there, the US price just took off. And so you know, it stayed up longer than I think a lot of people were expecting, and I'll talk about that just a little. But nonetheless, when you see that sort of price movement when it comes to non-fat, while it can be exciting, if you're watching the dairy markets, you know that it's probably not going to last too long. And, you know, markets closed today at $1.60. So we've certainly found a correction here and are getting back down to that global price. So maybe just to talk a little bit about what was happening in the non-fat market earlier this year, we did have some, you know, there were some fundamental reasons, I think, why we saw less non-fat being produced for a time period, but you can see that production has just been very, very strong as of recently, up almost 10%. But what really drove that price spike had to do with a major product recall that took a significant volume of non-fat product off of the market. So in doing so, that got us from the $1.50 range, kind of global market price, up to $2.30. So this was significant to the marketplace, drove class 4 prices up much higher than class 3 for a time period. There was about a $5 gap there. But as I said, you know, whenever this gets out of whack, it's only a matter of time. And where we sit today, we are just about at that global market price with a little bit more to go and to fall. So do expect that we will be settling at the world market price, and futures have us in that $1.55 range. So with that, milk prices are kind of coming back down to reality, and we'll show that later on in our presentation. All right, next slide. Going to the class 3 side, as I mentioned, a little less exciting than class 4 has been. You know, Jody, Christine, and I were talking last week, and when it came to the cheese market, I think, I don't remember which one of us said, anyone have anything exciting to say about the cheese market? And none of us did. It's really been quite status quo. So you can see production has been up on a total cheese basis. And, you know, domestically speaking, demand has been about flat. But just like the butter story, cheese exports have been driving the market and keeping inventories in check and just making sure that cheese just continues to flow overseas. You can see in the graphic on the right, blue is in, excuse me, on the left, 2024 is in blue, 25 is in orange. And you can see really starting in about Q2 of 2025, exports really started to take off. And in 2026, they have not slowed down. So we're looking at about, we've had some record exports when it has come to cheese. So this is really a great story to tell. But going back to my original comments and about demand, we need to make, you know, cheese prices are settling to that global market price. And what we've seen, particularly when it comes to cheese, just like butter, is that in order to keep those exports flowing, the U.S. needs to be at a fairly significant discount to the global price, somewhere in the 25 to 35 cent discount to really sustain demand. So, you know, last year we did see quite a bit of volatility when it came to cheese prices as we sort of figured out where we needed to be priced, globally speaking. I think we've sort of learned what our sweet spot is. Unfortunately, this is keeping U.S. cheese prices fairly low, you know, today in the $1.40 range. So not a great story from the stance of pricing and how this impacts milk checks, but nonetheless, we are moving a significant amount of volume and keeping the market balance due to these exports. Last slide here, going to the next one, is our last pricing commodity, looking at whey. And this really gets to that bucket of health and wellness and this incredible craze for protein. We just can't get enough of it. It's in our lattes at Starbucks. It's in our, you name it. It's even in our chips sometimes. So what we see when it comes to milk checks is it's dry whey that is the pricing commodity that goes into milk checks. And I don't think there's too much exciting when it comes to the fundamentals of dry whey. We're seeing quite a bit of it being produced, up almost 9%. But what we're seeing is just great support. Prices have been in this high, you know, between 65 and 70 cents, really being supported by the entire whey complex and the entire craze for protein. And so, really great and incredible record high prices for high protein products such as WPC 80 and WPI. At this point in time, I would say it's expected that at some point we will reach a tipping point where those prices can no longer go higher. People start making decisions and changing formulations and changing protein products, and these high prices sort of kill off some demand. But at this point, I don't think there's an expectation that demand is going to dry off anytime soon. So prices look to be quite consistent, again, in that sort of 65 to 70 cent range for the foreseeable future. So feel pretty good about this commodity here. All right, so I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to hand it over to Jody to talk a little bit about how this protein craze is showing up closer to home.
Thanks, Catherine. Before I do that, though, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity. She talked about cheese has been sort of a steady state. I think for most of my career, whey was that steady state. And really in the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years, maybe, that whey market has really taken off, and it's become something that went from, know about it, to let's dig into it a little bit more. And to Catherine's point, it's really the high value whey protein isolates, the WPC 80, 90, I think that's the limit, that's really kind of helping to support that dry whey price where it is. And so to bring it kind of closer to home, Josh, Brian, feel free to weigh in here, but you can actually start to see that protein craze start to show up in the Northeast area market and in producer pay. And so what we're looking at here is order one's class 2 utilization, which includes many of those high protein beverages and cultured dairy products like yogurt, Greek yogurt, and other high protein items that's in that fresh cultured space. And so the reason we, took the opportunity to include this here is that our order's actually seen new records be set, I believe, in the last 2 months for that utilization number. And so again, something that class 2 just sort of was steady as she goes for a very long time. This chart goes back to 2013. I think you can see somewhat similar or a little bit lower if you go back further in our history. But as we move towards these higher protein beverages and other high protein products, the milks landing in class 2 at times can both be a support to the price, or it can be a discount to the price, depending on the market signals in the month that we're talking about. And so really it probably warrants conversation from the different industry, and that's why I'm bringing it up here around, what does this look like in the future? And so if you want to move to the next slide, the other kind of long-term impact on order one as we start to think more broadly about kind of the markets here is, and apologies for the font sizes, what you're looking at here is what I like to talk about as manufacturing milk. And so it's manufacturing milk, or class 2, 3, and 4 milk as a percentage of the overall order one utilization. And so when I first started, and that makes me sound like the old person in the room, but when I first started 16 years ago, the class 1 utilization in order one was probably in the mid to high 40s%. We've actually set new lows over the past 12 to 18 months on what that utilization looks like. And so really it just sort of begs longer term, like what's the outcome, or what's the anticipated outcome from additional class 2 in our order, but also the declining class 1 on the market, and how does that interplay with the orders that are next to us and the competitive dynamics more broadly. With that, there's already been a couple other wild cards that we've talked a little bit about: drought, energy prices I'll touch on again. But since we're talking a little bit about federal orders for something that also has been fairly steady state, has had a very large amount of conversation over the last 5 years, and that conversation really continues to this point in time. For federal orders, just a few things to be monitoring and thinking about other than just sort of the Northeast piece. There have been lawsuits filed around exemptions for organic, and there's a whole coalition about that. I've included a link. I'm not going to go into the details of those lawsuits, not an attorney. Don't want to know what I don't know in many regards for those things. but it is worth monitoring. There's portions that are administrative around their requests for exemption that have been unanswered to this point. There are several legal cases that have been filed that actually have constitutional questions around federal orders and the inclusion of organic in federal orders. And so it bears a wild card. It could be something, it could be nothing. But these are the types of things that are worth kind of monitoring and being aware of. And because of some of the conversations around protein and the impact of protein on producer pay and these other things that are happening with national federal order discussions, the national milk producers, I thought it was worthwhile mentioning that they're reconvening kind of their federal order task force to start to dig into the little nitty gritty. I say little, lot of nitty gritty around some of the federal order discussions that remain outstanding from the hearing process. And so with that, shift gears a little bit. We've talked about different items. The next wild card I would touch on is the situation in Iran. It still seems somewhat fluid, even though it seems like there's been some progress on that here more lately. Certainly impacting energy costs, which both Christine and Catherine talked a little bit about earlier in the presentation. But Catherine did talk about the importance of exports, and the Middle East and North Africa was a significant area of export for dairy into that region. And so the strait played an important role in that. So the cost of exporting to those areas and even whether you could actually get product into those areas stands to be a continued risk as we navigate through what that looks like. Alex, can you advance the next slide, please? Thank you. Another wild card that certainly people on this call might be better suited to speak to than I am, but we have seen increased detections of H5N1 coming through the system again, particularly in the West. California is of particular note. As we kind of navigate what this landscape is, I think we understand kind of the impacts and what that is. I don't see it as a huge concern to the overall market for where we are, but there have been some increasing comments around how it's impacting calves and offspring. And so I think that for the longer term is something that does bear monitoring for the overall outlook for the marketplace. I would have to imagine that everyone in this room and on the call has heard New World Screwworm be talked about. I had originally asked Jay Jonker from National Milk if I could use one of his slides, and I was going to put, he likes particularly graphic images of what this whole situation can look like. But the reason I wanted to include it here today, and I opted not to include those photos, you're welcome, thank you, is that USDA has gone through emergency use authorizations, and it's worth note that there aren't any particularly good treatment options for dairy for infected animals. And it's not that they don't have treatment options. There are. It's that most of the treatment options come with an 18 to 21 day withhold time for lactating animals. And so to the extent that you get infected animals and having significant treatment needs, that bears a risk to both that farm and the overall marketplace that is warranted and be worth monitoring. Bovine TB, we've seen some or have heard of some increased detections of that through European markets and kind of off our shores. Similarly with foot and mouth disease that has moved at what Jamie, Dr. Jonker would say is a quicker than normal path of movement for foot and mouth across different parts for a sub-Ashton. This is where I'm going to get outside of my depth, like a certain type of that variant of that disease. And so those just all things that may not ever necessarily hit us here at home, but certainly could have a risk to overall marketplace impacts. Thank you. Catherine already alluded to it a little bit ago, but the dietary guidelines, GLP-1s, that protein market certainly playing a role here. I'll put a category together, and there's probably a lot that lives in et cetera here, but a couple things that bear mentioning is we are going through the renegotiation of USMCA. Want to maintain trading relationships with Mexico, work to improve those trading relationships with Canada, and certainly try to seek some of the access that's garnered. When it comes to tariff, the more certainty you have, the better business feels to transact in that environment. We've been what I would call somewhat steady state for a little while. But I believe that that's because the administration's been doing their homework to put together studies and investigations that support Section 301 tariffs. And those are the type of tariffs that have legally been more able to stick through the court system. We've certainly seen 301 and 232 investigation tariffs stick across administrations. So they seem more well-founded and well-supported through the court system that those become likely. We've seen those on manufacturing excess capacity and on forced labor. And both of those are due to be finished, those studies in mid-July, which creates a scenario where we could find ourselves in a scenario of increased uncertainty around what the tariff landscape could look like as we move kind of into the summer and in fall. We certainly had a huge win with Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act. We talked about it at our last meeting. I think we're still not entirely sure what that landscape looks like, and we won't know for sure until we get into the next school session. But I did include school lunch programs here because the dietary guidelines have really strict rules around added sugars. There is a risk to flavored milk in schools. And I believe the rule is the meal can only have 10 grams of added sugar. Most flavored milks have 4 added sugars to them. And I think when you're looking at 4 and a total of 10, it becomes a scenario that could be right to say, this is an easy opt-out option. But I think we're working to talk to folks on Capitol Hill and USDA to try to make sure they understand that the nutrient profile that comes along with that. But as we move from the passage of Whole Milk for Healthy Kids and the passage of the dietary guidelines, they're going through that process, the regulatory process of updating the school lunch program regs. And so continued monitoring to make sure that we continue to keep flavored milk as an option in the school lunch program. And with that, I got the easy stuff for the most part this month, this time around, but I think I'll pass it over to either Christine or Catherine to talk a little bit more about kind of look when you factor all these pieces in together.
Actually, Catherine threw this one in.
Oh, perfect.
All right, thanks, Jody.
Close it up.
I don't know that you did get the easy ones. I think there was a lot there that we could unpack. Nonetheless, going to the Northeast price outlook, just giving, I won't read through all of these prices, but just giving you a general sense of where our announced prices have been for the first 5 months of the year, and then where we're projected to go. So, very clearly you can see that we are anticipating that, May, June is really going to be the peak of our prices, and then we're going to see a market correction. So really, if you took anything from my comments earlier, it should be the correction in the non-fat market. And that's what's showing up here in the Federal Order blend price estimates here. So price for the remainder of the year, anticipating going to be in the $20 range, a little bit upward of that. And then I trust you can read that screen and kind of do the breakout there. So with that, I will pass it over to Christine to talk the really fun stuff, risk management.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is the closing thing. It's just a little bit on the dairy risk management side of things. I think, what I'm showing on the chart here just represents that opportunities are still available for the end of the year that would set up dairy producers better than where they were a year ago. You heard Catherine and Jody go through a wide variety of things that are moving things around, some of the risks and the watchouts out there. And so we have on the risk management desk been relatively busy as people are kind of trying to take advantage of that. What I think is actually maybe more interesting than even what's available today is reflecting on just that there are a good number of producers across the Northeast and truly across the country who saw markets in March and April that were quite strong and took advantage of pricing for the rest of the year. So there's a degree of comfort on dairies across the country that because they've got, today's blend price is around $20. Well, some of the folks that we have $22 contracted. You take lower feed costs and your beef revenue on top of that. Like it's just kind of going to change the game for a few of those producers. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that prices have changed quite a bit, right? Catherine showed that like kind of fall off of the peak. But for some producers, they're gonna be able to kind of hold that a little bit steadier as a result of what they did in risk management. So just food for thought, I would say. And with that, that is all we brought here for you today. If there are questions?
And if anyone has any questions who are joining us virtually, of 18 people online, just so the folks in the room are aware, please use the raise your hand feature on WebEx and then we can call you out in order.
Any sense for USMCA, by the time we sort of get done, when upping, you're gonna just average out, or how do you see that playing out?
I wish I had the tools to know. I think the thing we know is that it's probably gonna be a bumpy, somewhat unpredictable ride to figuring it out. I think that there's a fairly reasonable relationship with Mexico. I think Canada's another conversation.
Somewhat management meetings.
For that, but other items that are impacting the whole Canada-US relationship. And so I would hope that we stay somewhat steady. But will it look like potentially a
All right, I think we're coming back on.
No, that's.
Yay, we're back. All right.
Relationship.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, we lost Wi-Fi in the room.
A market increase in the number of schools that have had it on their bid when it comes time to order might be a different conversation based on what that pricing difference looks like at the time, but, and how it fits into their overall menu structure. But we have seen, as a class one officer, we've seen more schools than normal have that product on their just on their bids, which is promising. It has to be there to be able to even order it for the most part, because of the minimum bid requirements.
Are we now able to have Andy?
Hi. I hope I just heard Richard say it's okay for Andy to talk now. Anyway, I was just wondering if anybody in the room, certainly any of the previous speakers or anybody else for that matter, might have a comment to make about the level of stress on our dairy farms. Needless to say, that stress can come from a lot of different directions, pricing, costs, labor availability, weather, so on. And I wasn't meaning to restrict my question to just something like, oh my gosh, diesel is expensive, but rather more broadly. And I'm just sort of curious, certainly the press suggests a pretty high level of stress. The Purdue barometer is consistent with that. And I'm curious as to what your experience is for those of you who either are on the farm or have interactions with folks who are on the farm, and how you would compare what's going on now to previous times.
Our fertilizer for just corn alone was up $60,000 on 700 acres this year, just to fertilizer. And that's not a basic ground or any of that, that's just cool. Over budget from last year. I was fortunate, I locked in my diesel back in January when oil's at $60 a barrel. I've been doing that all summer so far. The guys that did $4, it's twice what they paid last year. Once again, thank God for beef on dairy. We've seen revenue on our 900 cow farm anywhere from $30,000 to $35,000 a month on wet kids. It's just unheard. But there is pain, and I'm sure you're hearing it on your farm.
Yeah, I was gonna say from Farm Party's perspective, it's a really mixed bag. You know, people often ask, you know, like how our farm's doing or how our dairy farm is doing, you know, whatever modifier you want to put on that. And it's a really tough question to answer because it's kind of like a bell-shaped curve. Like, you know, for every person that's hitting it out of the park and doing great, there's someone else that's just hanging out by their fingernails. You know, even, you know, the middle bulge kind of moves up and down with markets, but there's always those outliers. So, I mean, with the appropriate weasel words in there, I would say that there's definitely a real concern about non-feed expenses, like you know, labor, fertilizer and fuel costs, inputs of all kinds, everything just costing, you know, a little bit more. But at the same time, I don't want to say like we've never seen this kind of interest, but we're definitely seeing above average interest in expansions. We're financing a lot of like rotary mill parlors going in. A lot of, you know, improved equipment and technology being invested in. I think the investment tax credit is driving some of that. And I don't know for sure, but I think there's also a little bit of like front loading of that expense. Like I think some farmers are concerned that ITC might not last. So they're spending a little bit earlier than they might otherwise do it, you know, because their budgets are going to get tight at some point, and like, will the ITC be on the chopping block if that, you know, who knows? But there's definitely a big investment in technology that I think is being partially driven by ITC and partially driven by industry optimism and processing expansion and, you know, any number of factors. So I don't know if that answers the question or contributes to it.
Well, in the Northeast, there's obviously a lot of interest in expansion due to the increase in hopeful demand that's hopefully its way here. Overall, in our area, I would say farms that are, you know, they've got another generation or whatever, we're still optimistic and still moving forward.
And
The little group that are hanging on by their fingernails, 60 years old.
Yeah.
Got two, they just sold a tract of land and now they're gonna sell their cows.
Yeah.
And the other one's waiting to sell one or the other.
Sure. And for every one of those farms, there's neighbors looking over the fence thinking, I want that field. You know, so.
We contacted the contractor about the barn, and he says 24 months. And we can get it. So they're so busy.
I think the other part that's driving it is just the labor thing. I know in our neighborhood, at least, we're getting, as a custom operator, we're getting a lot of calls to backfill for people because they don't have people to perform.
Yeah.
So.
Guys, you characterize one group and hit it on the farm group. How would you characterize, like, who are those folks, or what characterizes that group? That's
Common traits in that group would be larger herd sizes, more north and west in the state of New York. Aggressive management mentality, tend to be more forward thinking on their labor management, if you will, like those are the folks that are building high performing teams. They're not the people that are like grumbling about they can't get good help and that sort of thing. They're the ones that are like, you know, paying their employees well, treating them well, building up building up their staff, that kind of, I mean, I don't know if that is a cause of their high performance or a result of the fact that they can afford to do that, but that's one thing I've observed, I guess.
And how are folks that are looking at expanding and meeting this expected demand or whatever? I mean, are they in a decent financial situation to,
Yes,
do they need you to, get new equipment, take on?
yes, with the but. And that but is that many of them are taking on very high levels of debt by historical standards. They're, it used to be that like $6,000 per cow was considered excessive. And now a lot of farms, not a lot, but some of these farms that are aggressively expanding or investing in equipment and so forth are like looking at like $8,000 more or more. And you gotta be careful when you get that high, because it limits your flexibility and your resiliency in a downturn market, that sort of thing. That'll come down as they pay off some of that investment and work through things, but that's a lot of money.
That's good, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. So next is Carl, right? Pro Dairy.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Pro Dairy.
Pro Dairy. I'll be Pro Dairy. And you will more case started for Pro Dairy. So good afternoon. Most of you, I think, know me. The Falls MMAC. I spent about 20 years in the CAFO nutrient management area. I went out in the industry for 3 or 4 years and played around in the greenhouse gas space, and had a chance to come back to Pro Dairy a little over 2 years ago as associate director and then dairy climate leadership specialist. And so I started, a couple of caveats here, right? One of this conversation that I'm going to engage in here with you in a few moments with these slides, really I'm coming at this from a broad mind, from squinting across the dairy industry, thinking about my 25 years or so in dairy. I'm trained as an agronomist, and so some of you might accuse me of practicing dairy economics without a license, if you're absolutely correct. So but I'm bringing a perspective, I think, by looking at some of the data, thinking about, okay, we have this opportunity to expand. There's a lot of excitement and interest in dairy processing. Good God, Doug, I think about, back I was a young farmer and rancher in Farm Bureau, not to date you on this, but in 1982, we need more processing capacity. And we've been talking about that for decades. And finally, it seems to be, right? So what does that mean for a herd? And again, putting that environmental hat back on, okay, so the state has these goals for greenhouse gas reductions. A couple 100,000 more cows might have some impact on that. And what about the water quality in the lake? So I started coming at it from that environmental perspective. Thanks, Elizabeth, for getting me going. So this is a national map from IDFA with EverAg. There's some plants missing on there, but you can see a bunch of dots here in New York. The next slide. Depending on whose number you believe, we're around 3 billion announced in 2025 in New York. I've seen less, I've seen more. Again, I think that's an IDFA number that doesn't include, say, Cayuga and a couple of other notable expansions. I think another thing that we don't talk about at all is what's going on, the additional investment at the farm. So it'd be really cool to get a little better handle on that, to be able to help frame up that economic argument. Go ahead, next slide. And this also, right, Christine and Catherine and Jody talked about this a little bit, right? Components are up, and fat and protein will be correct milk production for fat and protein, right, which is an element of overall components. This is New York's milk per cow going back to 2016. Milk per cow is in the orange, so volume is going up. But the fat and protein corrected milk is going up faster than volume. And we're seeing some of that also in the plants and paychecks, hopefully. Go to the next slide. This is a graph, another way of talking about components going up. This is from Jason Carson's the Dairy Profit Monitor Program. 47 identical dairies, 2 years, and the orange line or the rust line is 2024 components by month. And then the black or dark blue line in the middle there is their 2025 components by month. So all of those dairies were about tens of a point in components. Again, reinforcing the things that you all are seeing. Next slide, please. This is from Dave Barbano. If we start to look out forward, right? So this is projected from 25 to 2030. I think that's national protein and fat numbers. But again, you see when you correct for fat and, or sorry, not correct for fat and protein, but when you look at fat is projected to go up faster than protein. Maybe that some people are happy, maybe not so much. We'll have to see how that plays out in the processing. Okay, go ahead, next slide. So New York State in 2025 was ranked 4th in production, milk production per cow. Where were we 20 years ago? You know?
Up lower.
Yeah, a lot lower than 4. Go ahead, next slide. Right, we were 13th place in 2015. Some of our peers, Michigan outranks everybody by a couple thousand pounds, not fat and protein corrected. This is just volume of milk. It's really hard to get that data to play around and do that correction. So that'd be a request from statistics, so it's just to report those items. So Texas, Colorado, New York is 4, Wyoming, Idaho are next. Go ahead, next slide. Here, and apologies for the size. This is milk per cow, 3 states, right? Our neighbors, Vermont and Pennsylvania, and going back to 1980. And you could see for about 25 years or so, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, we were basically, intertwined in terms of milk per cow. And then something in the middle aughts, late aughts happened. Vermont and Pennsylvania kind of continued on a similar trajectory, and New York peeled off, and we started increasing at a really nice and faster rate than our neighbors. And if you look at it in terms of the rank of milk per cow, back in 1990, we were neck and neck again, 25, 21, and 19 between New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. And you can see, Vermont and Pennsylvania are now running 32 and 37 in terms of production per cow, and New York has gone to 4th. So something really interesting is going on. We can speculate why, but we are a different dairy state than we were 15 years ago, and they're different than our neighbors. And this slide shows a 1990 trajectory. Again, the 2 lines on the bottom, there's 3 dark lines on there. New York is the orange one, that's at the top, purple, and then a pinkish one. Those are Vermont and Pennsylvania. You can see where, again, Vermont and Pennsylvania tapered off. The white lines in the background, those are the 4 dairy states, 4 or 5 dairy states that we are in competition with in terms of production. And you can see our trajectory looks a lot like theirs. Which again, I thought was interesting. As an agronomist, I can't explain it, but I can call it out and see that's really interesting what we've done here collectively as an industry. Next slide. This one I put in there, our milk rate has continued to go up in 2025. We think we had 650,000 cows. That seems to be a little bit of a fluid number as well. And we made a little over 16.5 billion pounds of milk. Next. Now I looked at Pennsylvania and their total milk production over the last several decades. And we sort of came together in the early 80s, early and mid 80s, and we were about 1 billion pounds plus or minus apart. Pennsylvania's cruising along 10, 11 billion pounds of milk. New York cruising along about 12 billion. And then again, all of a sudden in that aughts, we sort of turned the jets on and got up to that 16.5 billion pounds of milk. Pennsylvania's tapering under 10 billion now. Half of that difference is milk per cow. Half of that difference, that's 6 billion pounds spread between Pennsylvania and New York. We added just by several thousand pounds more milk per cow that we make versus that herd. It's fascinating. It really, all of this to me serves to emphasize the opportunity and the value that productivity per cow brings to it. Go ahead, next slide. What did I have after that? So this is where we're really practicing economics without a license. We took an average mailbox price of $20 and we just applied it to the total milk production, just to try to average out the ups and downs. And so several hundred on that basis, that's 16.5 billion pounds of milk is adding several $100 million worth of gross revenue to farms if you have a level price through that period. We think that's useful to understand too. Go ahead, next slide. And this is a slide, only I put it in here because over 22, 23, 24, even 21, we've about 4 billion pounds, just under 4 billion pounds of milk have left the state. So even if our production has gone up, we hit 16, 61, 16.5 billion pounds, about 4 billion pounds is leaving the state. And I use this in an analysis to think about, okay, if we need a bunch more milk, if we need many billions of pounds more milk to service processing capacity, if we would like that to come from New York, how do we think about the milk that's currently leaving? Is that going to keep going out? Is it going to, some of it going to stay home? What's that look like? So, okay, next slide. Go ahead. So now to what I really wanted to talk about in terms of the analysis is I worked with Mike McNamberg and his team to run 3 different scenarios for milk production over the next 5 years, projecting out. One was the business as usual. Hey, milk goes up a couple hundred pounds per cow every year. A little more fat, a little more protein. Let's correct that for energy. And what's that number look like? And then I said, well, what if we could increase that rate of productivity and fat protein correcting, a little faster? What do we think we could do reasonably? And then what if we really put a stretch goal out here? What if so there's a moderate acceleration of milk production increase, I call it, and then there's a significant acceleration. What if we really hit a grand slam and we could get dairies to really crank out? Now, what is that? As I said, maybe a stretch goal. I assume it's going to take 2 acres per cow for forage and manure application, and that's going to stay. And I assume crop yields and feed efficiency are both going to go up a little bit, and so we're going to offset. We're not going to need a lot more acres per cow. Again, just to, as I said in February or March when we did this originally, right when Katie and Antonia saw it, I was a little lazy, and so I just okay, I'm going to fix some of these things. I'm going to fix the land base. I'm going to fix a couple of other things in this analysis so I don't get too crazy. Go ahead, next slide. So when you break it all down, under business as usual, we started out in 2020, I think the 24 number was 26,500 milk per cow. If by the time we got out to the end of 2029, our moderate productivity acceleration would put us at 30,000 pounds per cow. And our significant productivity increase would put us at 36,500 fat and protein corrected milk per cow. I'm sorry, that was the volume. And then, so the fat and protein correction, 26,000 pounds of business as usual is always 31,000 pounds fat and protein corrected. It's 35 under that moderate productivity acceleration and over 40 right at the aggressive number. But look at the number of cows. So if we sort of do a business as usual, and if we need, this is another big if we need 10 billion pounds more milk, now maybe that's aggressive. But we can, maybe it's 8, right? I heard 7 and 8 seems pretty realistic. I assume that none of the milk that goes out of the state comes back, maybe some of that will. I assume that we're gonna keep using, right, all the plants that are currently running are gonna keep using milk the way they have been. That's probably not a correct assumption either. But I kept pretty much everything I could stable. We just added 10 billion pounds. And so, and we can, right, you can split that in half, however you want to do it, you can decide what that increase in milk you're gonna need. But so the business as usual scenario, 10 billion pounds more milk means we need 250,000 more cows. And honestly, in some of the conversations, right, I've heard some people go, wow, you know, our plant alone is gonna take, you know, over 100,000 cows more to serve it. So these numbers to me don't seem too crazy. 250,000 cows though, on top of the 630, 40, or 50 we currently have, from putting my environmental hat on, makes me a little bit uneasy. We better be doing this thoughtfully if we're going to be going to that many cows. Now, if we could just get a moderate productivity increase of that 4,000 pounds of volume per cow, a little bit more in fat and protein, that cuts that number basically in half. And if we can get a significant productivity increase over 5 years, we essentially don't need any more cows. And I don't think that's realistic either. We've already got, I mean, right? The parlors are being built, the barns are being built, they're in the queue. I don't think there's 200,000 more cows worth of build out in the queue. But I think, you know, if we can bend that productivity number higher and faster than doing it currently, there's a real opportunity here to do this in a reasonable way. I think forage acres too, again, if it's 2 acres per cow, that 250,000 cows, that's 500,000 acres. That sounds like a lot. Part of the sort of taste great, less filling conversation Chris and I were having right before the meeting. You know, the land is, we used to say in the 80s, right, when there was famine, that, oh, it's a distribution problem, right? We have enough food, it's just, you know, we don't have it in the right places. Land is like that to some extent. I suppose fat may be like that to some extent as well. That moderate productivity acceleration, under 300,000 additional acres to serve those cows. And again, the aggressive one, plus or minus, no net acres needed. If you go to the next slide, you know, so think about the land. We certainly have land quality issues, the availability of land. Where is the land relative to cows? We have solar. Well, what about solar? And maybe we all know those kinds of conversations going on. If you go to the next slide, though, we've got well over 1 million acres of land that is not, as near as I can tell, directly serving a growing dairy forage. Right, there's a bunch of corn grain, 500,000 acres or so of corn grain, twice, you know, right as much as our corn silage crop. Almost 300,000 acres of soybeans and these other crops. That some of that can be diverted to supporting and growing a dairy forage if it's in the right place. So, you know, 200,000 more acres, to me, I'm not all that worried about that. We do need to make sure that our land base and our manure is aligned. So that could be interesting. And again, land isn't always in the optimal place for that. But again, from a statewide basis, land, we probably can do this, even if we lose 100,000 acres of solar. And again, I don't want to be too cavalier about the solar thing, because if it's, you know, if it's the farm next to you that you wanted to grow dairy forage on and you lose it to solar, I'm not diminishing that. That's a big deal. So I'm really not looking at it just from a local perspective. It's more of a larger scale perspective. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, and so initially, I mean, that was row crops, and then there's a bunch of other hay land that also is not used to support dairy forage that I can tell. So keep going. Thank you. So, you know, where do we go from here? We've got, I mean, New York has shown that we have an expert industry, right? We have fantastic producers, we have fantastic allied industry that supports the dairy farms. The proof is in the pudding, right? With that milk production per cow that's going up. We've got an excellent system. I would argue we have a strong teaching and extension system as well. We'll take a little credit in the research pipeline as well. This new processing capacity on top of what we already have. So what's next? I think focusing on productivity per cow. I think we need to have conversations, and next week, Allison and some of the other folks in the room here are going to be at a Pro Dairy Plus Advisory Committee meeting where we're going to hopefully be talking more about, hey, what do the processors need? What are the constituents of the milk? What kind of traits would you like to see? What research do we need to maybe help, deal with the changes in how the milk is coming into the plant? So that's about it. What did I have next after that? Yeah. Did I very good? Where the clock's back on time. Yeah. Just better.
Out of the acreage slide, I noticed that you have some that are corn grain, corn silage, soy. I'm intrigued by the corn grain and corn silage, you're saying it's not servicing a dairy?
So if, we can't teach that out from my stats. Certainly there are dairies that are growing some of their own corn grain. There are crop farms adjacent to dairies that are sending that. That corn could be grown, it could be silage, right? So that corn grain acreage could be silage. It's not hard to get that grain from a little further to make up silage. So I think some of that could be. Yeah, and soybeans as well. We could grow dairy forage on the soybean land.
Yeah, I knew it was hard to sort of parse it out, but it feels like a fair amount of it is still going to dairy. Even if it's just going to the mill and then coming back, it's still servicing dairy, because to get to those milk per cow, you probably are feeding aggressive energy values.
Yep.
To get there.
Yeah, so it'll get displaced as dairy, like it could be dairy forage land and not. We know where we can get corn grain. We can't go to Ohio for the forage. Yeah, so, right, if dairy forage becomes a more profitable use for that land to grow versus corn grain, I can see that shift. Yeah. Yeah, there are, right.
I think I have to make assumptions.
Yeah, and you have a whole list of goals here for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts?
Any questions online?
No questions online yet. Everyone online, if you have any questions, use your raise your hand feature.
I guess I'll add that Carl did a version of this presentation at the Northeast Dairy Management Conference, and a lot of farmers in the room, kind of standing room only discussion, and it led to a really good discussion about community relations and how you have this, if your neighbors are grain farmers, how are you working with them to get the feed you need, but also the nutrient management side of thing. And then just kind of neighbors in general, like where the people are distributed in the state and where the land is and where the farms are is not as perfect as we'd like it to be. So just the importance of that, kind of that mentality of being a good member of the community and thinking that through when your farm is looking at a growth or expansion project.
We are trying to get the message out to producers too, don't just, throw that next barn up and then worry about, manure storage or manure, a place for the manure to be applied. We need to be thinking about that as planning, not an after. We don't want to get into this place where we're grossly out of line with the land base and then we're going to do it now.
That's more of an issue in some places, I think.
Yeah.
Our Cato planter works in that Troyer Park, and he's got a lot of farms that are running up against not enough land base to move in order to. especially the ones that are taking it away and some of the other byproducts. So
We do have one question online. Max, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you, Carl. Max Finberg with Chobani. And curious as to some of the recommendations you would have on the policy mechanisms to get to that moderate or high scenario you were describing. What are the steps that need to be taken across the board, not just on an individual farm level, to get us there?
Yeah, I'm gonna, I don't know if I should be practicing policy without a license.
Yeah, you keep going. You already got no license on the other side, so please.
Yeah, all right. I'm already out of bounds.
Go on, bro.
So I have, Max, I thought a lot about this from an extension side of things. I think, and in talking with Dr. Van Amberg, there are things that we think we can do, getting that calf off to the, there's some things that we can do to get the calf off to the right start, get the heifers growing quickly, get them into the herd at size and at a younger age. Things about cow comfort, stall size, a lot of the components. If farmers look at who in the herd is making the components, it's those fourth lactation cows, maybe the fifth lactation cows, and so we probably have to be treating them a little bit differently than we might a first calf heifer in terms of space, pump space, and having a stall lay down in and all that sort of thing. So I think I thought about it a lot from that perspective, Max. And I think we'll probably be doing some, outreach, roadshow, or various trainings to start to work with the industry to put the package together. In terms of policy, I mean, I don't know. I mean, when the demand shows up, I expect the milk's going to come.
big policymakers gonna be labor.
Yeah,
I would just add to Carl's comments that I did a much more rudimentary analysis than what Carl did. I didn't project any productivity growth or any, I just assumed, took what cows are producing today and extrapolated it out. And I came up with almost the same number of cows. So just as a little bit of validation of your numbers.
thank you.
And
That's all I'm trying to do.
interestingly enough, most dairy farms have anywhere from 45 to 50 cows per worker on their farm. We're gonna need about 5,000 more farm workers. To get that number, assuming we don't get that big productivity gains. And yeah, like to your point, where are they gonna come from?
That's a really great point.
From a policy standpoint, I think probably ITC is one of the biggest things that can help sustain this because it helps to allow for that investment in cow comfort issues, technology and all of that, so.
Yeah, the DBIC out of Vermont has invested a lot. I don't know what the breakdown is by state, but New York has gotten a lot of grant money out of that, and it's supported some really interesting and useful expansions.
I don't see any other online questions. Max says, thank you all very much. Very helpful and comprehensive. Okay. If no other questions, I think we're okay to take a break.
Thanks, Carl. Let's take it to 15-minute break.
Yep, we'll be back at 2:45. All right, so room, we are off mute now. People can hear us. Virtual attendees, we are gathering just below the screen where we can see you all in this room to take a group photo. If you'd like to come on camera and be part of our photo, please do that now. Adjustment ability. Casey, I see you laughing. Casey, you're not allowed to go on photo. Sorry.
I always laugh because the commissioner calls us Hollywood Squares when we're on these, and I really feel like that is exactly what will be in that picture is the room and then Hollywood Squares.
You can't say.
Okay, everybody?
It's not to say that you don't.
They probably have much.
What do you like?
It's been here.
Wait, at least.
Are we doing a group photo?
Yeah, yeah.
You want to turn off the camera so we get.
I-
I'm not sure.
That's okay.
What they are. Great for us, but.
Okay, here we go.
Are they working?
All right, because it's.
Come on, everybody. Group photo.
Photo.
Group photo. There, is that everyone?
Should be everyone. Everyone.
I think you can go.
Tall guys.
Back me up.
Got it. Perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
Now get milk and cookies before you go back to your seats. Yes.
Well, I can't.
Sorry for everyone joining virtually. We have milk and did virtually we would.
That's all right.
Right, Chris.
No worries, you got it, thank you. Okay.
What is that?
Oh, Casey. Casey's even online, so that's a good sign.
Oh, yes, yep.
Would rather be in the room with you. I do apologize because we know the meeting's important, but it's all about making the trip now, isn't it?
All right. So Casey, you're good to start.
Are you back to recording or you're not doing that? I know we pause it. We all work as a team to make sure we go back on the recordings.
Recording is already in progress. You're good to go.
What a deal. All right. Great to be with everyone. I just have a quick update on the dairy modernization program funding. We're up to 3 rounds. Super excited about that. For those that aren't as familiar, right? So the goal is to enhance the dairy supply chain efficiency and prevent milk dumping during emergencies. That was round 1 went out $21.6 million alone. That equated to 103 projects for farms and cooperatives. Those projects range from $50,000 to $250,000 per farm or cooperative. 90% of those are underway or complete, and 30 of those have been, to break it down a little bit further, 30 are done. 63 are currently underway. Everyone can imagine we're in the Northeast, right? Got to wait for that frost to come out of the ground, logistics, et cetera. So pretty excited to see those finalized, plans and projects coming in. Future funding. So round 2 is another $8.5 million. Those applications will be available for later on this summer. We'll be reaching out. And then in the 26 and 27 budget, there's another 13 million to support the dairy farmers further. We're excited about that. The focus for 1 and 2 has been towards critical on-farm improvements, storage tanks, tankers for transport, pipelines, farm milk loading systems. And then round 3, we're super excited, is now going to also include milking equipment. So that's a nice twist there. Very excited to see where that goes. Just from where I sit, overseeing the grant, everything from a plate cooler to a chiller system to load out sampling systems to very large silo installations, all extremely impactful to the individual facilities. Just really, really excited to see where this goes. I know earlier, I think Chris mentioned the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center monies. we're very proud of this, and again, excited to see where it'll go in round 3 with that new inclusion of milking equipment. And that's really all I have for an update, unless there's any questions.
Casey, when do you anticipate round 3 would be announced? Application period?
Oh, we got to do round 2 first. Round 2's later this summer.
Later this summer. Thank you.
Yep.
And as soon as that does go live, similar to what we did in round 1, we'll make sure that this group is included. So you will receive a direct email for those folks that may know individuals interested. For that, I apologize, Casey, if I'm repeating. For the round 3, obviously we're awarding round 1. Round 2, you would be excluded, but round 3, you'd be welcome to reapply specifically for milking equipment. So really looking forward to that. Going out on the street.
Casey, will the minimum and maximum awards be the same?
I know in round 2, yes. I have not seen round 3. That's still on a napkin.
Okay.
I'm joking, but yeah, we haven't had that conversation.
That's where a lot of farms start, so.
Like Julie comment.
Yes, Julie wrote a comment saying that's exciting. Thinking of the labor conversation, I'm assuming robotic milking equipment will be eligible for round 3. Yes.
Yeah, I believe the language you'll find in the budget talks about milking efficiency, and that's kind of with the idea, right? We know that there are a lot of farms right now that are expanding, that are bringing in those robotic or rotary. So we do believe that this will help a number of farms across New York State.
You mentioned that you're working on round 2 now. So round 1 is over and done with.
Yep.
How oversubscribed was it? Like how?
Significantly.
So was it 3 to 1 or, like applications versus
Yeah.
funded?
Like 2.5 to 1.
2.5
I
to 1
think.
roughly?
Yeah.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're anticipating that a number of the farms, so one of the things, you'll see a lot of the criteria is very much the same. In round 2 versus round 1, so those farms that, may have already applied, so have been, denied. I know that there's been some outreach, I believe, with Farm Food and Growth Fund as far as why, farms can start to get a head start already on preparing that material, so that when that goes live, we'll be ready to get set. Any other questions on this?
I was just going to say to Chris's point, though, we're super excited to see what the subscription is going to be on the milking equipment side. It's kind of a new area.
13 million is not gonna last long.
Especially if they put some robots in there. It goes quick.
Casey and online team, I think the color you missed there is Chris is having a large thumbs up about the direction of that subscription.
Big smiles.
Thank you for that.
Okay, other questions? Comments? No? Hey, it's yours.
It's fine.
The floor is yours.
This is just follow up to our last conversation that we had in, I believe, December now, where we were talking again about New York as a sustainable dairy state. One of the things that we commonly get asked is, well, when is New York going to be number 4 for dairy production? Not per cow, right? But overall, ultimately, our focus, and something you'll hear Commissioner reference quite a bit, is the focus really is to make sure that New York is the most sustainable dairy state. And sustainable beyond just environmental sustainability, but we want to make sure that we have dairies for generations to come, right? Leaving it better, making sure that we have that next generation. So with that in mind, we are going to go through what we talked about during our last meeting, do a high level overview. This will be provided, I believe it is online now, but we will send you the link after to kind of go through in more detail. But we really want to kind of take away the opportunity to say, in the different categories that are laid out, what is the number 1 ask in that category, right? Looking at all the different recommendations that are been compiled, if you have the magic wand, right, to be able to change one thing today, what would it be? So with that in mind, asking the question again, right, how do we be the most sustainable dairy state? And the focus is, again, to achieve that vision of the most sustainable dairy state. what are our top priorities as a group? And what is the ask, right? How do we move that vision into our reality? So again, this is just the slides that we talked about during our December meeting with a variety of topics, including workforce development and labor shortages. We've already heard a little bit about that today. The supply chain readiness and infrastructure needs, sustainability and environmental practices. Again, we've touched a little bit about some of the CAFO needs today. Policy, regulation, and innovation, market access, and product development. So let's just jump right into that workforce development conversation. So this is very tiny. I will read off the major points because I can't even read it up there. So my apologies on that. So breaking it first and the concerns that we heard during the meeting. And again, if any of this is inaccurate, needs to be amended, please let us know. But first and foremost, right, that shortage of CDL drivers. We touched on this already. That is a significant concern right now about qualified truck drivers. That really impacts the entire supply chain. That time and commitment required through training that has been seen as a barrier. Aging workforce across the farms, and again, who's going to be our future labor, right? Where is that available now and going forward? Difficulty in gaining experience, right? How do new workers or new to dairy gain that valuable experience, especially around specialized roles, something like crop leadership, right? How does somebody start the process? Qualified worker shortage in processing. So we did hear that processors are experiencing a shortage of qualified personnel, sometimes leading to inaccurate results and wasted resources, right? It takes time to train. And if they're just going to walk out, that doesn't do anybody service. And immigration policies, I'll leave it there. I think we all are familiar with what those concerns are. Some of the recommendations.
I would suggest you change that to guest worker policies rather than immigration.
Okay.
Just sends a different signal.
Absolutely. Okay. So going on to recommendations. One of the recommendations we heard was to expand the CDL training programs, right? Having it more accessible and more comprehensive. Promoting agricultural careers. And this is something that we touched on last time, but talking about how are we able to change the perception around agriculture, right? Some of those more traditional roles that you think sows and plows, right? But it is beyond just that. And talking with youth programs like FFA and 4-H to build that workforce pipeline. Recommendations, right? How are we attracting and retaining talent? There's a need, particularly in trucking and dairy careers to be more appealing. Talking about work-life balance, we know it is a lifestyle, but how do we balance that work life a little bit more? And addressing potential barriers for those wanting to enter the business. Other recommendations is to enhance that training and skill development, right? Getting them skilled workers for processing facilities, including those with knowledge of food safety and quality control. Supporting training initiatives, potentially through institutions like Cornell. What are those? How do we enhance them? And then guest worker reform, right? A strong desire to fix what's happening at the federal level to allow year-round H-2A status for dairy immigration workers, immigrant workers. Those are our recommendations. That's quite a lot. And I know each of them have their own sensitivities to them. But, right, talking as a group, what do we think would have the most meaningful or immediate impact to fixing the workforce development and labor shortages? If we had to focus.
I guess I'm curious if you and Commissioner Ball have heard from other commissioners what feelings around the country are on the Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act that we anticipate coming out next week from GT Thompson.
Well, clearly it's not the comprehensive fix that we've been working for a long time. Feels like a step in the right direction. All of the commissioners haven't talked about it yet because it's kind of breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
You still have some of the same players in the White House who bent on rounding them up and sending them out of here. That needs to be dealt with.
I guess there's a little bit of optimism that things are moving in the right direction there. But several people pointed out, the biggest limiting factor we have to growth in the state right now is going to be the guest worker program, the legal. So I think we're going to watch very closely to see what comes out of that in Washington. We know they want E-Verify. We've always, in the ag industry for 30 years, held up. We're fine with E-Verify. Give us guest workers. Give us a program. Just don't come in and tell us that our workers are illegal. So I think that's still approach. So I haven't heard a whole lot from the industry yet, other than others. This was kind of, I hate to even bring this up, with the CDL H2A issue is still hanging out there.
Mhm.
Where you guys are at with that, if you've done any analysis, but conversations are happening in New York. I guess you know there's a lawsuit about that. Kind of state something different, independent of the feds. I don't know. We've asked the Attorney General. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's hard to, that's kind of where my mind is going with a couple of these things is like, what's the state role versus what's limited by what's going on federally? So where should the state spend its time to get the most value out of that investment? But I do think that kind of the underlying issue of kind of ag labor at the federal level and guest worker program, H2A changes, is a really, really huge obstacle or opportunity, depending on what happens next, I guess. So I think there's a lot of potential in the H2A changes that are going to be presented, but there's also a lot of worry of, will current workers trust the program and want to move into it? Will all the federal agencies who need to be involved have enough staff to process the numbers that dairy is going to bring to it, and other ag sectors that have more year-round needs? So I think it's really scary for employers and employees to think about, but I think there's finally realization by more people that something has to change, or else we're heading to a place where we can't produce food for our communities.
Yeah. I was very confident that we were going to get H2. Because it wasn't, I mean, it was, we know it was going to be sticky wicket, but you could see the pathway forward. At least I could. And we had Christy Boswell down there helping them out. We got close in the first Trump administration, actually. There were conversations. So I think that's great. I think the universal wage rate, all those things that have been kicked around. I could see that. I could see a pathway to that. It fixes part of the problem, as you know, that we still, the workers that are here that are on H2A that speak foreign language, or what do we do there? That's much harder, much more difficult. It's still really important to other than large H2A. So we got a couple of fixes on one half of the problem. I guess that's good. The dynamic in Washington is shifting so fast that we get ready to go on break. So you don't get to go on break if you haven't gotten anything. That's the way it works on the farm. So it's still a little bit of loose.
I think what we hear on the producer side, the concerns are is going to be the touchback and how we're going to handle the workers are already here. But we've already got years of investment in training. It's just they menial jobs. These guys, we got a guy who was a veterinary in Mexico. He was good work.
Sure. Trust is probably the most important aspect of this time, more so even than technology, I think. And right now, if you were a worker offered a touchback, I think that would frighten the heck out of any of them. Well, I maybe we'll get back to that, right? Because will they change the deal? Partway. So I think that trust has been compromised. So just sit here and lament this.
Yeah.
But I know there's about 8 bills comprehensive immigration of guest worker. Just made a new house having all aspects. We'll see. It's frustrating having been part of this for like 30 years to just see what we're still talking A jobs. Which was a long time ago. So I'm not sure, other than we gotta keep grinding that. Keep pieces. And it's not just agriculture again. It was a big deal back then because it needed to be comprehensive, but it wasn't just ag. We realized we couldn't do it alone. Just. We needed to. That was the conclusion after ag. It's more than ag, and if we wanted it to be successful, you had the business, chamber of commerce is. To get across the finish line. It's kind of harder to put those pieces together. I'm pretending people John Allen in Chicago a couple weeks before. This week, I guess it was. Answer your question.
So I'm hearing guest worker reform on that one.
Yeah, as I look at a lot of those, those are the ones in the middle, the 3 in the middle are all long-term investments, really, if you look at them. And I don't think we can deny that we need to do those. But certainly the expanded CDL training programs would also be beneficial to producers and processors. And the guest worker program, I think, I think we've got to deal with that or we're in trouble just because looking at the demographics. There just aren't enough bodies to do all the work we've got to do.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving on to supply chain readiness and infrastructure. Some of the concerns that were raised last time, it was logistics and hauling challenges, right? Concerns about the efficiency and safety of trucking operations, including the impact of regulations and potential for accidents. There was infrastructure gaps. This is talking really a lot about the 3-phase power availability and costs in rural areas. I know particularly as we talk about farm expansions, those new robotic milkers, they need power for it to run. And then broadband and connectivity issues, lack of reliable broadband and cellular service, hindering the adoption of new technologies on the farm. Some of the recommendations that came out of that conversation, one was investment in processing capacity. We noted this as a positive development, those record investments that have recently been made. Farm modernization, so support for farm modernization grant programs to improve infrastructure, storage, and transportation. Addressing the broadband and cellular service shortfalls, so recognizing the increased reliance on technology, being able to improve those in the rural areas to support farm operations. And last is that 3-phase power access. So addressing the challenges of accessing 3-phase power in rural areas, which is again crucial for modern farming. I think all of them are important, but I'll pose it to the group if there's any one of those 4 that stands out above the rest.
I think the 3-phase power stands out for me, but I'm curious what can be done. Like, are there actionable solutions? We're ready to help and get behind those and make it happen. But I'm always a little bit at a loss of how to tackle that issue.
I would add to Allison's comments. I think I might have brought this up last time, and I would probably expand it from dairy farms to processing and availability of energy for expansions and just overall grid infrastructure, on top of three-phase just for farmers. Both the cost of running it to their local facility, but just general grid challenges along the way as well.
Prioritization, like I was at Oregon, and they actually, the data center was using, gonna take so much power to one farm, put it in their own gen sets. Because you couldn't get enough power.
And that's
On a different scale, you got 5,000 cows. But I mean, it was, but they put it in this data center south of Portland, Oregon, and it just sucked up everything they could produce. And it's happening all around the country.
You know, in reality, I think if you look at the farm modernization, you could almost incorporate the last two on an individual basis into that.
Yep.
You know, so the individuals could deal with it, because in a lot of cases, three-phase power has been dealt with on an individual case basis. I am concerned about the overall infrastructure and whether we'll really have power or we'll start seeing brownouts with, because new farms with new technology and cow comfort require more power than old farms do. So.
I've heard producers, so I really want to bucket the bottom one into two, because I think Doug's comment is fair around kind of individual dairy farm modernization pieces. On the power piece, on the grid infrastructure, I think that's a different conversation, but warrants its own bullet. We've had producers that have talked about generating their own energy for different reasons. That's not always possible. Warranty issues and other things on parlors play a role in that, and willingness to give up those warranties by generating your own power. But also generating power requires assurance of other resources availability. And the one I'm thinking of in particular is either diesel or natural gas, and certainty of natural gas availability plays a role in at least the second part of that new bullet that I would love to be added.
I just want to throw out to this group to keep this agenda. One of, I think, significant achievements, noteworthy achievements, certainly in this budget, was, the climate changes goals and counting. I don't think we can overstate that, because we sort of went through the exercise of the state energy plan last year. And it was agony to be a part of that. It's a much more full, comprehensive look at the grid, at the kind of the all summary talks about. So I think as now that we've crossed over this bridge, and have changed the governing system, have changed the language to allow thinking about making energy outcomes. That it'll be a right time to start. Okay, now what we do, and looking at the statewide energy plan, the conclusions they came to, quite logical. I think pretty well thought out. So this group needs to be engaged in that and be ready to, okay, kind of level the playing field maybe a little bit. What do we do? Let's make sure that we gain efficiencies in energy. We don't use them up in data centers and things that aren't going to help grow our industry. Let's make sure we focus on that. So I think the idea of renewable natural gas on farms, electricity on farms, sequestering carbon on farms, so it's going to be, there'll be opportunities there. There's no room for it in this budget, but paving the way to do that is what I would say. Speak to.
And I think Jody, right to your point, is talking about beyond the farm, right? What is the processing needs? As we're getting more milk, we know that there's gonna be more power that's gonna be required to support the expansions and making sure that the grid is able to do so. Okay. Going on to our third topic, sustainability and environmental practices. So again, being thoughtful of environmental implications of farm growth, particularly with regard to water quality. Sad Carl left, but greenhouse gas reporting, so the emergence of, the greenhouse gas reporting was vocalized as a concern due to its perceived immaturity of the science and the administrative burden associated with it. And water access, again, ensuring access to water for rural communities and dairy production was noted as becoming a growing concern. Recommendations that came out of the conversation, environmentally conscious growth. So again, ensuring that those farm expansions are conducted in a responsible and environmentally conscious manner. Water quality prioritizations and developing strategies that prioritize water quality and farming practices. Being a good neighbor, sustainable feed sourcing, planning for sustainable feed sourcing to support increased cow populations. And energy production, again, right, exploring opportunities for farms to generate energy and contribute to climate goals. Of those 4 recommendations, are there any that you believe should be prioritized over the others? Do they all rank equal?
I guess I'm a little concerned what the action items would be under each of those. As you look at them being priorities, what kind of action items are we looking at there?
I will share Julie's comment in the chat, and she says, well, going for the obvious laugh in this wonderful group, but also being a bit serious about it. In light of Carl's presentation, research and development in this area seems important too. And maybe an action item, as Doug just mentioned.
Well, there in those first 2 is where Pro Dairy has quite a handle on a lot of that. We've been working through more management and things like that. Sustainable food sourcing. I know I got some farms up in Mohawk Valley, my region, that have lost hundreds of acres to solar. And when I say farmland, not just some side hill, good stuff, so. I think maybe the action plan there is some regulations around keeping our farmland in production, not in other.
Yeah, balancing the need for renewable energy and farmland preservation is gonna be, if not the issue, it's gonna be a major issue. If not the #1 issue facing agriculture in the next, and then forest probably. And states like New York that have aggressive climate goals. Both are important and
Especially when you're talking those higher value soils, which are typically better located for easy access to energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
Along with the energy production at the risk of being a broken record, we've had producers that have attempted and there's not grid space sufficient to take on the energy they could generate from a dual use solar environment. So not converting farmland, but repurposing it from on top of rooftops or other ways, but they don't have the ability, the grid can't accept the power they would generate. And so it's like almost a couple of sub bullets under the energy production piece that is a larger piece of that state energy plan that I need to get a little closer to.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Going on to policy, regulation, and innovation. Concerns raised by our last meeting, legislation outpacing innovation. So a concern that legislation may move faster than the industry's ability to innovate. There was some concern vocalized about packaging and EPR legislation, so that was being monitored. and what that would mean for our industry. Complexity of regulations, the complexity and perceived lack of clarity in some regulations, such as greenhouse gas reporting, were a concern. Land access and use, again, pressure on current land base from solar and other energy projects. It's like some people ran ahead. Great challenges to pursue growth or expansion. And the federal grant process. The process for obtaining federal grants for research and development can be challenging. I think that could be putting it nicely. Recommendations, support for innovation. So willingness to innovate is present, provided there are appropriate timelines. Streamlined regulations, so a desire for regulations that are not overly burdensome and allow for industry growth. Investment in research. And reading ahead, continued investment in agricultural research, particularly institutions like Cornell, is seen as vital. Preserve farmland. Ensure that farmland remains available for food production amidst competing land uses. And federal program support. Advocate for the revamping of federal grant programs to better support dairy farmers. I'm going to say ditto to our last conversation on the previous slide, but does anybody have anything further to add? I'm not. It just feels like an opportunity to bring up Alex generally recognized as safe discussion, the bill and policy around that. So I'll let you talk to that if you want, but this feels like where that fits.
Yeah, certainly the grass bill that was passed earlier this year is a concern for our members. We've spoken a couple of times. I know we have a call coming up this week, I think, with the governor's office. Just the impacts that with what's going on federally with grass alone, plus the issues that we'll have with some of our members with incorporating some of those ingredients. So.
Could you give us a very brief or as brief as you can background on that?
The graph may be a little bit different in this context.
Generally recognized as safe, includes some of the ingredients that are going into some products from toothpaste to cheeses to
things like food dyes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That are, like the title says, generally recognized as safe by the FDA. And New York has kind of cracked down a little bit on some of those. And I know some of our members are kind of scrambling as to what substitutes are available and recipes, if they need to adjust it. So kind of where we're at right now. And hopefully we can see if we can put the brakes on it at some point here in the veto strategy.
Okay.
I would add to that the concern around processed food was it's considered overly processed food or highly processed foods, because that's pretty squishy.
Yeah.
2 procedures, 3 processes. You know, where does that definition go? Like,
right.
Make it America healthy.
Just reading a comment from Max. Reading comment from Max in the chat. He said tomorrow is the call with Governor Hochul's team. Commissioner Ball and Ag and Markets appreciate anything to weigh in on not signing that bill.
It's Friday, Max. Just, but we have a call this afternoon to prep for it.
Okay.
You scared Alex there. So if you see me sneak out, it's, I got a call at 4 o'clock to prep for our call later in the week, so.
Gotcha. All right. Max says thank you. Days run together.
They do.
So unfortunately, based on where it is the process, right, as a department, we are not able to comment on pending legislation, but we are certainly paying attention to where that is and open to feedback from the industry on what potential.
And I may circle back with you after our call Friday, because I think when we spoke with that call with the governor's office a couple of weeks ago, they wanted to break it off into 2 different conversations between grass and EPR. And it sounds like your team was gonna be on both of those calls, but then they kind of said, well, maybe you guys do a 3rd call with just Ag and Markets. So I'm not sure where the cards fell with everything yet, but we're still working on logistics. So EPR is less of a fire, I guess, right now, obviously. So legislature becounts.
We have a comment also from Andy. He says there was some indication that the Make America Healthy Again agenda is keen to pursue front of pack labeling that would primarily be simple alerts to things identified as quote bad. Ultra processed foods are a likely focus, and it remains unclear how dairy foods would be categorized.
Moving on to the last, but certainly not least, market access and product development. Concerns raised in our last meeting, food safety and quality. Maintaining high standards of food safety and quality, especially with extended shelf life products. Packaging challenges, the need for responsible, sustainable packaging solutions while balancing shelf life and food safety. I think what we just talked about, right, that EPR probably would also fall within that category. And food waste, addressing food waste such as in schools and senior living facilities. Recommendations was promote dairy products. Very key, highlight New York successes, including cream cheese and cottage cheese production, focusing on quality and value, emphasizing the importance of product quality, exploring opportunities for value added products, and support for local products, right? Increasing the demand for locally produced dairy products in schools. Anything further to add? Okay. Are there any other concerns that were not raised in the last meeting that we haven't already talked about today, or any other recommendations that you believe, if as a state or if we pushed at the federal level, would be vital to the growth or sustainability of dairy in New York State?
I'll add one thing that kind of sparked on the workforce. Concern my members have had is the paid family leave issues. We get them kind of like with Allison, we don't have any suggestions, I don't think at this point, of how to fix it, but it's definitely been a hindrance. Jody, I don't know, maybe upstate, if there's any perspective you could offer, but just as we know, it's a 365-day-a-year operation, and we got laws that are now allowing employees to take every third Tuesday off, which impacts those third shifts and, shift work type positions. I just know it's been a big headache for HR and managers with an already a stressed workforce.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It's very helpful.
And there's a couple back and forths going on in the chat right now, asking if USDA has issued its school milk guidance. And yes, indeed, they have. And we just shared the link for everyone in the chat on that. And just for everyone, so everyone knows, we're recording this meeting and all PowerPoints will be shared as well. So recording and PowerPoints will be coming your way later this week.
Yep.
Actually, along that lines, with the school lunch program, since we're on the federal and state policy discussion aspect now, I think Professor Novakovich might have something he wants to share on that. He's still around.
He is. Yep.
And you want to tell us a little bit about, you sent an email earlier today.
Actually, what I mostly wanted to share was a question. I wish I had more insights, but as was just noted, USDA has indeed issued a new rule, super simple, that just simply says you can now serve 2% and whole milk options in both for chocolate and white milk. Pretty much period, the end. As per the law, the saturated fat limitation of 10% on the total weekly diet exempts milk entirely. Doesn't matter what kind of milk it is, 1%, whatever is exempted from that calculation. So it just doesn't enter into the calculation in any way, shape, or form. However, there is still a caloric cap that obviously whole milk is going to contribute more calories than skim. So I don't know if anybody's taken a look at, to what extent you're going to have less of something else in order to allow more whole milk to come in. Given that whole milk is on every student's plate, or milk, not necessarily whole milk, but given that milk's on every student's plate, it's not an inconsequential source of calories. So I'm curious about the extent to which school districts are going to either say, hey, let's stick with low-fat milk. We think that's better for our kids. Or if they're going to say, gosh, I'd love to go to 2%, but wow, that makes some hard trade-offs on caloric intake. I'm kind of curious how that conversation is. And I imagine for a lot of school districts, this is sort of new, and maybe they're not particularly well prepared to even think about it. And informal, really minimum sample view, where I've actually talked to some folks, suggests that there's quite a few people who are like, oh, really? No kidding. How about that? I'm also really curious about whether or not we've seen any change in the interest that milk processors have to supply schools, which many of us remember was a pretty big focus of the advisory council a few years ago. I'm curious about what we know about that, whether it's worse, better, about the same. My impression is it's not a whole lot better, but again, that's a pretty small sample observation. Anyway, more questions than answers on my part, for sure.
Andy, this is Jody. Is the link that's in the chat, is that to just the whole milk piece of it, or is it on the rewrite of the school nutrition implementation?
Antonio posted that link, so I'm not exactly sure where it goes, but USDA does have a published rule in the CFR that, I'm telling you, is like 14 words with a whole lot of boilerplate around it that just simply says, go ahead and buy 2% whole if you feel like it.
So it's the whole milk piece, not the dietary guidelines.
Correct. Yes,
Correct.
absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah, and the link in the chat, Jody, is just from, looks like a couple weeks ago on June 4th from USDA to school nutrition directors outlining Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act, included in breakfast, saturated fat exempt, the same concerns that Andy just raised.
So I mentioned it earlier, but we've seen more schools putting it on their bids. So there at least is an interest level, or we're reading between the lines. That's a bit of an interest level in offering it. When it comes down to it, I think the caloric requirements and then how the DGA piece of it is going to get implemented will play a role, but also the cost feature. It is more expensive. So if in the sustainable dairy, there's a way to find additional dollars to support schools being able to make that decision without it being too burdensome, I think is something that would be of interest and gets talked a lot about amongst the dairy farmer community.
Well, National Milk is probably Secretary of Agriculture pretty hard to make funds available to offset that.
Yeah.
It's in the
We haven't seen anything in that regard yet.
What I will say in a very non-scientific research way, from those that I've heard that have started to implement the whole milk in the schools, they can't keep it in stock. It flies off the shelf. So it seems like student interest in whole milk is certainly there, which I think is positive, but it is, from what I understand, it is that financial aspect of it, and that are they, balancing it with all the other products and offerings.
Jody Max put in the chat that USDA's whole revision for child nutrition programs with the updated dietary guidelines is expected in the next few months. They are talking sooner, but we will see.
Thank you.
Other folks can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but again, we will see is a pretty wise comment. But also, if I'm not mistaken, pretty much school districts are deep into the procurement process for their purchases for the next school year. I don't really know, if you get some new guideline in September, I have no idea how that works. I'm sure there's going to be some conversation with schools about, if everything gets easier, well, okay, that's probably not so bad, but it's kind of an awkward timing, I think.
I think our district posts these bids, all that had to be in by July. You're probably in the same, because I know you supply our school.
Yeah. Most of the bids are already, the procurement to Andy's point is mostly in process or wrapping for the next school year.
Max is asking, do we have any examples of New York school districts ordering whole milk now? Dallas was a big one, he's heard, out in Texas, and then Chicago also testing a small pilot.
I'm aware of school districts ordering, but I don't have a big sample size to reference.
Oneida County.
Oneida County. I think to your point, that new flexibility for whole milk and 2% dropped at the end of the school year, like after procurement's already done, right? So I think the start of the next school year will be the next test to see how many more participants sign up for whole milk.
Okay, great. What we look like in New York City? Just out of curiosity, given it's the biggest school district, right?
Are you guys still doing some loads there? I know Clover Farms is doing New York City out of Pennsylvania.
Just curious.
I don't think they're doable.
They're having a hard time getting anyone with capacity.
Just kidding.
to take care of them.
Yeah.
But they're still very interested in New York State's 3% of it, about 15%. So they got a ways to go yet.
Yeah.
First 15 is the easiest, and the second. So they've traditionally been a little controversial when it came to flavored milk and all that kind of stuff. We're still engaged with them, still talking to them. So they're still on board. We will be authorized, we will be engaging in a tour, bringing them upstate to visit agriculture upstate this year, which we did a few years ago when we started the procurement of groups and so. Right.
Other federal state policy topics. Brian, did you want to say, we were talking about it earlier or not?
Yeah, I can add a couple, either minor or maybe ones a little bit longer term that's being worked on. Andy may be involved in one of these, but we are continuing the process. There was funding put in place to look at the cost of production, basically a mandatory survey of the cost of production of plants. The plants involved would be some of the ones that we are pricing commodities from, and we would be getting cost information. But there's been a lot of work that's going on with, well, what costs are we getting and how we, each plant's doing things differently. So there's a lot of work that's going to go involved in that. And I believe, and if he's on, can correct me, you might remember the dates, but I believe looking at 2028 before we're putting out data for 2027 at the earliest. And I think that's so we're following some steps in that, but there's funding that was approved for that. We're required to use that towards getting this up and running. I do not have information on, when we have that information,
what that exactly is going to look like. You know, we're still thinking, is that going to be here's this one cost number, or here's a range of costs, and then how that's going to be used. Will we be required to go to a, you know, all right, here's the information industry, now we'll have a hearing followed by referendum every time this comes out, or, you know, something else. So right now, based on current rules, I mean, my assumption is, well, I think it still requires a hearing and a referendum every time. You know, it's not necessarily a fun process, but it's the process. And I haven't heard anything else different on that. And again, Andy might have been some discussions in that, if he wants to add to that. So that's, you know, ongoing. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of information. There have been some visits with folks in dairy programs with each of the plants that will be involved. Those are ongoing, a lot of effort on that, and some discussions going on. Andy, before I go into the other items there that I have, do you have anything to add on the cost of production efforts on that?
Yeah, let's call it cost of manufacturing, so we don't get confused with farm cost of production. But I think it's important to remember that this activity does not require a hearing. This is a different ballpark than a typical federal order regulation. And for those of you who are wonky enough to remember, it's more like the process. In fact, it's exactly like the process that went into creating the price survey from a number of years ago. So we've got to propose a rule. We've got to have that rule reviewed internally. We have to have that rule reviewed by the White House, so to speak. We have to put that rule out to the industry and give them time to make comments. We have to think about what those comments are, make any adjustments that we feel are appropriate, and eventually we'll be able to publish a final rule, which will say how we're going to collect this information. So there's a bit of a process, and I can assure you that my colleagues at USDA are paying attention to this and working on it. But like a lot of stuff, it takes time, and you know, there's other stuff going on as well, so that complicates things. Additionally, I would also remind us that this requirement to do this new process arose out of the hearing where people had to think about make allowances. And part of the formula also involves, quote, yields. However, USDA will not be recommending new make allowances. They will not be recommending new yields. They will be doing, as directed by legislation, they will be doing a study of the cost of processing for exactly the same people who report on the national sales report and the yields in those plants. And it will be up to interested parties to decide whether or not they want to use that information to advocate for changes in make allowances or any other component of the formula, such as the conversion factors, through a hearing process. So it's a subtle distinction, but USDA will not be making any recommendations remotely about make allowances or conversion factors. It will be more like a research report on costs of processing and yields observed in those plants. And as Brian said, those reports will not just say this is the number, rather will give a display of information without revealing anything confidential that will allow industry to ponder what does it all mean in terms of what we want to advocate for make allowances, assuming we want to advocate for doing anything different.
And I believe in the hearing, one of the criticisms maybe of the cost surveys that were used in developing what we are using now was maybe their voluntary nature. The one significant difference would be this is a mandatory survey. These plants would have to give this information. They're not opting in or out, depending, voluntarily. So I think to some extent it also, the information being provided being mandatory also maybe just that one criticism of what had been put forth for the hearing and analysis at the hearing and for the referendum.
Indeed, and another sort of related aspect to that is every time anybody else did a survey, Mark Stevenson most famously, but the Ag Co-op Service back in the day did those, California did those. It was, chef's choice on which plants participated. That was nothing that was, standardized over time. And under the new arrangement, it will be exactly the same plants who participate in the sales survey. So that should create some continuity over time, that you're kind of measuring the same critter, not, having different companies come in and out at their own whim.
And just a reference that you're in that survey, currently you're in the pricing survey. And so you'd be in the cost of manufacturing survey if you are making more than 1 million pounds of that product in a given year. So you cross a certain threshold and then you are in that survey. I think that's the.
Exactly. You have to have the capability to produce the products as defined in the regulation, which narrows it somewhat. And you have to have at least one reportable sale during the calendar year. You have to have at least one reportable sale during 1 week of the reportable year. If you dipped your toe in that water just once, you're in.
Thank you, Andy. The other, one of the federal provisions that we have in the Northeast is to participate in the pool. You've got to ship a certain percentage of milk to a pool distributing plant. The order that we have, it's typically without being adjusted. Somebody would have to, we'd have to ship 10% of volume to a pool distributing plant. That goes up to 20% in the fall months of September, October, November. Over 10 years now, used to be years ago, this provision was there in case it was keep the fluid milk to get to where it needed to be. We'd get pulled in a lot. It used to be we would increase that as needed. And at some point it was, we're decreasing that because it's, the order says to meet the, basic consumer need for that, but also not to create, uneconomic movements in milk. So we kind of have to find the right balance there on this type of provision. So we're kind of used to, we've been getting for a number of years, we want to, adjust that. And the target is typically been, the request is typically been for dropping it from 20 to 10%. We currently got requests, so we're in a period of time. It's actually July 17th. I looked up to make sure to have comments in by. So we get the request from someone in the industry, it can be from anywhere. We got a request from a New York cooperative to lower that percentage to 6%. So it's something a little bit different for us, lower, as the past 10 years anyway. So the process is, we ask folks in the industry, please submit your comments if you have comments on that. And we put together our own investigation. And after the 17th, we can go into, look at everybody's comments. And so those who we haven't received any comments yet, that's fine. That's typically what we might see. People are busy doing other things that are right in front of us as our week. But anyway, that is something that we are doing. We have to balance that. There are some things that are affected by that as far as who can, who's pooling on the order and sharing in the pool value, and who can be, basically we want to see that you are, actually you're able to serve this class 1 market to be part of this pool. Maybe it's also you're not, maybe getting milk pulled from somewhere else and then grabbing some of the value in this area when you're really not going to be able to service the market. So there's some things there we have to be paying attention to, especially if you bring a number too far down. But so we're looking at that now. That's what we're doing in-house there. And the only other thing I don't have information on, but confirming, yes, I saw Jody's slide said we had our hearing on pricing provisions, and there was a lawsuit, a couple of them actually, but it's not unheard of. We've seen lawsuits to decisions before. So I don't have a lot of information. I don't have a crystal ball and any update on the lawsuits and where we're at. But that's something somebody, I think it's related to organic being involved, organic being regulated by the Market Administrator's Office and the federal orders. So that's about all I have. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions or discussion on? Other topics? Nothing online?
Nothing online yet.
We talked about it a little bit during the sustainable presentations, but EPR came up. There are several other states that have passed that, and I'm just starting to get visions of those, let's call it the non-GMO patchwork of the 2018-ish era. And so just trying to make sure that, you know, as we approach looking at this type of legislation or policy for the state, that we're doing it in a way that is similar to other states to try to minimize compliance requirements and extra costs from compliance. So, you know, certainly it didn't pass both chambers, so it's not a current discussion, but we've seen it introduced year after year, and so it becomes something that starts to feel more likely. But just keeping in mind, like, the compliance patchwork varying from New York State, as you all will know, lands in all 50 states and across the globe, and compliance with that becomes very difficult.
Yeah, I would say,
Let go of that.
it's fair to say we dodged the bullet the last couple of years on that. We've been asked about it at the department. We just say, it's not as simple as just, you know, passing these costs on to a manufacturer or producer. It requires thoughtful conversation because FDA is involved with whatever milk goes into. You just don't decide a bottle or something overnight. So we've just kind of said, I think the industry is willing to have the conversation, but let's make sure the right people are at the table so we can get it right. Just the conversation thus far.
Because we can be a part of the solution and we want to.
Sure.
Just need to make sure we do it in a way that is manageable.
Yeah, exactly.
And I maybe get on our soapbox for a minute, but food is different. It feels like EPR for food is a different conversation than other parts of EPR. And so some recognition of that.
Food safety deputy commissioner here is, just, you know, beating that, and I'm very proud. So, you know.
And I think, yeah, one thing I do want to acknowledge, and I actually had the opportunity to attend a food law conference a number of months ago, where a number of general counsels and outside counsels were brought together to talk through some of these changes that are happening at the, you know, nationally, but as a state by state approach. And I do think, you know, that there are a number of considerations that come into play, the product formulation, right? Shelf life, what your availability is, right? Depending on where you're sourcing the ingredients from. So all of that is very much top of mind when proposals are put forth, and recognizing, you know, food safety is a very real thing, right? And, you know, you change the package, you're not just changing potentially, right, the flavor or the appearance of the product, but also that shelf life, right? That stability of the product and what that means for the consumer. So certainly recognized and need to talk about. And Julie, thank you for your team at Cornell for focusing on food safety as well. I know that you have a team there looking at what packaging can mean for food safety. So thank you.
Okay. Don't see any other comments online. Any others in the room?
Happy Dairy Month. I don't know. They also have to chuckle a little bit because our December meetings usually talk about what, you know, how dairy prices are gonna, you know, dip in the next couple of months. And then we could meet in June and we always hear about like how good the dairy prices are. So I feel like I kind of emotionally know what I'm gonna brace myself for each meeting. So thank you for a little bit of stability.
I guess the only thing I would bring up is the closing of the JBS plant in Pennsylvania. We talked earlier, bro, about how important that beef price is to our dairy farmers. And if that removes the market for our cull cows, that could be impactful.
Is that why I lose them or different?
JBS is planned.
It's gonna add 3
It's a big one.
hours.
Yeah,
There's been like 3 plants
yeah,
nationwide recently.
yeah. They announced 2 just last week, I think it was. Yeah.
That's a concern.
Yeah, so.
But, they couldn't get labor and they couldn't get jobs.
Yeah, no, there's concern about that, especially smoking out. Bad house, yeah.
Well, I was gonna go 3 hours longer in a trailer to get to market.
Yeah,
So obviously it's gonna cost us money.
It's gonna cost them.
10,000 jobs. So. Public comment period?
So for those online, we're officially beginning the public comment period since this is a open meetings law compliant meeting. So if you do have a comment, just use the raise your hand feature and we will call on you. So far, I'm seeing none.
Well, I just need to answer all the questions.
Yes, it was. It's all I would problems.
Yeah.
This was a pretty wide ranging meeting. Everywhere.
Okay,
That's good though.
it's good. I think you're good to close out with any closing remarks. Our chair, our commissioner, and deputy commissioner.
Well, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to be here, and I mean, it was really wide, we covered everything, we did labor, transportation, and environment. So, which of course is all important to New York Dairy, so that's really valuable. Thank you.
I'm excited. Happy Dairy Month. This is a great time. And really, truly, at the end of the day, I really do appreciate the work that everybody does, right? From producer to processor to, supporting the industry. It's so important what everybody around this table is doing. So we support and, celebrate Dairy Month specifically in June, but really we do it all year round. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the only thing we didn't talk about was New World Screwworm, and I'm not gonna louse that up.
It's a long ways away.
I thought this was a good exercise that you did, and it just seemed to kind of putting it all in one place, because it's pretty hard to prioritize those. Those are all that's the reason why we're here. So I guess close it out, Dairy Month. Dairy still looks good to me in New York. I say this a lot, but get down to Washington, get involved in those conversations and come home and feel like we're still okay, we're still doing the right things, we're still expanding our processing. Farmers are still thinking about it, investment tax credits and things like that, so I like the environment that we have here. And I do want to kind of charge everybody to thinking about energy on our farms, because that's gonna help all our dairy farms be control their costs a little bit, take advantage of the statewide energy plan initiatives, that all of the above. And I think we'll have some opportunities now that we're past the budget to really dive into the climate resilient farming, the sustainable futures opportunities that are in the budget once we have time to let the dust clear a little bit. So I would encourage you to think that way. But thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.